Africa.
Tech.
Innovation.
The future of business.
This is Inside the C-Suite, where we bring you real stories from business leaders across Africa, how they started and how they built their companies to be industry leaders. Today, we are privileged to host Ken Njoroge, founder and CEO of Cellulant, a leading tech company in Africa. Ken, tell us about your mobile commerce evangelism.
I think you have heard the name. It's Ken Njoroge. So I've been an entrepreneur for 19 years. First started a company in the web industry. We built one of the early web development firms in the region a couple of years ago. So I actually started in 98. I was 23 then, I'm a young guy. We ran that for 5 years and we sold that to Africa Online, who was the largest ISP at the time. And then it was very early days of mobile, so it felt interesting to look at the mobile space. I always thought that, if Africa was going to digitize on the back of mobile platform, you could generally say that in much the way the internet revolutionized a lot of industries everywhere it went, that the same would happen in Africa. An evangelist is kind of generally been a timeless title for me because I'm always preaching about the vision of the business, why we do what we do, why I do what I do, and so on. I think my conversations are usually generally about that. I'm not too much of a social media guy, so I haven't updated my LinkedIn profile. So when it got set up, I called myself a mobile commerce evangelist, and that's just generally been what it is.
Amazing. Some fun facts about Ken. 11 locations, 34 countries served, 300 plus employees, 120 plus banks, 40 plus mobile networks, 21 plus mobile wallets, 600 plus e-commerce merchants, and 120 million consumers in Africa. All this is the wonderful work being done by Cellulant. So, Ken, what is Cellulant? Is it a proverb, a noun, a verb? And why that name?
So Cellulant is actually, it's the name of the company, but Cellulant is actually an attitude. I always say that attitude has really focused on Africa. When we started the business many years ago, we spent a lot of time complaining about a couple of things. We complained around just Africa itself, why the roads were the same, why electricity wasn't working. My co-founder is Nigerian, so we complained a lot about Kenya and Nigeria and the same stuff. We complained about Africans in general. We complained about the state of the continent and so on. And eventually we came to a conclusion saying, look, everywhere in the world you see Africans doing great things, but just never in their own continent, right? And so at some point we said, okay, fine, we keep complaining about it, but what are we going to do about it? So we actually then decided, look, I think we are kind of entrepreneurs. Could then these Africans sort of build a business in Africa that was Pan-African, that was a world-class business, a master in its leader, without the baggage that you typically saw with large African businesses at the time, businesses that were not founded on political patronage, businesses that were started by two regular guys from regular backgrounds, and businesses that weren't built on corruption, right? So we wanted to build a business and never paid a single cent in bribe. And then we figured for it to be world-class, it has to be innovative. It needed to be in technology because, technology was a knowledge-based business. And then it needed to be really large. And we thought, $1 billion, that sounds like a good number to build a business. And then we sketched this on a serviette, and we foolishly went out to start this business. We thought that we'd get to $1 billion by 2014. It now looks like we'll do this by 2023. I think we have a very credible chance of getting there. So it took longer than we thought it would, but it's generally been a very interesting journey.
You have a Nigerian co-founder. What gave you comfort to work with your co-founder, and where did you guys meet? How did this all happen?
I met Bolaji sometime, I think it must have been 2001, I think. He used to work for P&G in Ghana. And then so he had relocated to Nairobi to run strategy for a World Bank project. They had a project called the African Virtual University at the time. And so somebody who came from his network, had wanted to put a couple of young guys who are doing interesting things because he has some ideas that he wanted to run by us. And so we happened to be in the dinner, and there was this one quiet guy who sort of was observing the conversation and so on. And then somebody asked him about Nigeria. I listened to him explain technology in Nigeria, telecom stuff, and just said, wow, that guy is super smart. And so at the end of the dinner, I just stretched across the table and said, can I have your business card? He gave me his business card. I went, and it's like most things, you put them in the desk, and then, you get overtaken by work. Then I think a couple of months later, I was clearing my desk. I saw his card. I said, man, I never stayed in touch with this guy. So I dropped him an email. Happened to have been, had his office a couple of meters from where we were. And he says, well, let me come by your desk in the evening and let's chat. And so he came by and we started chatting. And then we chatted for 3-4 hours every single day, talking about Africa and so on and so forth. And one day we had an opportunity to present to an operator in Uganda. And I called Bolaji and I said, okay, Bolaji, we've been talking about all this stuff. We have an opportunity to go and meet a CEO, CTO, Chief Marketing Officer of an operator in Uganda. Can we go? And Bolaji, without hesitation, just said, sure, man. And he says, can I buy the ticket? And he bought a ticket. Didn't ask me for a single cent. And we got on the plane and went. And it was a very interesting experience because the next morning as we were preparing to go to the pitch, I had a shirt my mom had bought me, and it didn't have buttons. So Bolaji told me, yeah, that shirt requires cufflinks. I'll give you some. He gave me cufflinks, showed me how to wear them. And then he was wearing a cream suit. I always never forget this story. I just said, okay, so this guy is Nigerian. I mean, who on earth wears a cream suit to a business meeting? But the attitude on the guy, well, I said, fine, he knows about cufflinks. Maybe it's actually posh to wear a cream suit and stuff like that. Anyway, so we went into this thing. We delivered a pitch. At the end of the pitch, the guy said, okay, great. When do we start? And so when we walked out of the meeting, we said, oh, you know what? Actually, this Cellulant was just always on a name on a serviette. It wasn't a company set up and stuff. So we went around Uganda. How long does it take to set up a company? It was like 6 months, 8 months. Checked in Kenya. It was another 6 months, 8 months. And then we were depressed for a couple of days. And then one day we asked ourselves, hang on, how long does it take to set up a company in the UK? And it took a day. And then we said, let's set up a business in the UK. So Cellulant actually got incorporated as a company in the UK, completely by expediency. And then after that, it became a cool story. It's like we are a UK-based company doing business in Uganda and Ghana. It was always a nice story. It got you through to meetings, right? And that's how Cellulant was born.
Amazing, amazing. And when you look at the journey of building Cellulant, so after the napkin, after setting up in the UK, what got you off your feet? Initial sources of funding, people always say family, friends, and the other one, fools. So, what really got you going other than bootstrapping? Who else had the faith to actually give you funding? Because at some point, your funds can only do too much.
Yeah, in the early years, it was very interesting. We built a web development firm, sold it. Off the top of your mind, you think that, we made some money. Actually, we never made any money in that sale. That's when I got my first MBA in business, right? Because when we basically sold 3 Miles to Africa Online, what effectively we did is we got into a deal that we effectively gave away 95% of our company in return for a debt. $500,000 debt at the time. And then if we basically, I think in the preceding years grew 4 times and continued to grow at a certain rate, got 25% back into the company, right? So by the time that we actually exited, it was in debt. So when we went and was sketching the vision and mission of Cellulant on a serviette, had 0 money, had a debt thingy hanging at the back of my head. Bolaji had a job. I was freshly married, got my firstborn son in our first year. Bolaji was also freshly married, moved his wife from Ghana to Kenya. And that's, the state of things where we were. So in getting some of the early stuff done, on day one of starting the business, you go in, you got, like in Uganda, we had this contract. So you need to service that. You need to buy some software. You needed to hire an engineer. You needed to get him a laptop and stuff like that. So essentially we scrapped here and there, trying to get these things going. So the first sort of things were financed off Bolaji's credit card. And then at some point it just became unsustainable to do that. It just didn't make sense. I started to leverage every line of credit we could get. From staff, from suppliers, from landlords at home, from my staff's landlord. Those were the people, I would say those were the first angel investors in Cellulant. 2004 we went to market. 2004, 2005, 2006 was funded by sweat, really. Employee sweat, supplier sweat, family sweat, everything. My mother, Bolaji's wife, everyone. There's every single center we could lay our hands on, we did. Right?
Indeed.
And then we moved to the bank, and then 2011 we basically got our first private equity institutional investor. It was about $1.5 million.
Let's think a little bit about this journey. It's been hard. It's been funded by leverage. He's had to borrow from suppliers, from lenders, from, all sorts of people. What is this that you saw instead of going and looking for a job? You decided to branch into entrepreneurship.
It's a good question, and a question that I have very strong opinions on. And nobody should get offended, right? So Kenyans, yes, they've got the main hustle, side hustle. I think it's stupid. Yeah, because what happens is this. So let's be practical about it. So let's assume that you work for a bank. And so the side hustle, main hustle, how does it operate? It says that, okay, so 8 to 5 I work at the bank, and then I go and do 2 hours, and let's say maybe I'm growing potatoes. So when are you going to be a master of any one of those, right? I mean, because the business takes a lot of time, takes a lot of grit, requires a lot of, let me say, what I call proprietary insights. What is it that because there's nothing, we don't build rockets to the moon. Every single thing that we do, we have 10 people that can do the same stuff, right? Even Cellulant, which is at least supposedly a sort of high-tech leader. Every single thing that we do every day, there's a competitor somewhere who can do it better, faster than we can do it. So what is it that makes a difference? What makes a difference is that for the last 15 years, we have seen through and solved every potential problem that can kill us. That's the difference. And then we've done that from early morning to midnight to 3 o'clock and so on. And we've been doing that for a while. So in the end, because we have applied ourselves for very long, we just have a higher chance of succeeding than the other guy. That's just it. Ideally, you're denying a business or passion, whatever it is, the best of you. And on day one, when you start a business, you are the only asset that the business has, right? It will fail, it will move forward, it will succeed only by you on day one. And so it doesn't seem to make sense to me that then from day one, you only give our business 20%, 10% of your time. Sooner or later, whatever business it is in, if it's in agriculture, the rains and the floods will kill your business. The weevils will kill your business. If you are in financial service, the exchange rate will kill your business. Sooner or later, something else is going to sort you out because you're not committing enough time to figure out how to last into the future. So that's one part. I've got a strong opinion around. I just say, well, choose.
So tell us exactly what it is that Cellulant does and the solutions that you provide and the markets where you're operating in. The challenges that you may have faced. I know you're in Malawi where there's FX challenges. I know you're in Zimbabwe where no one ever wants to go. They're not sure of the political climate. You're in Nigeria. You're in, Liberia where there was Ebola. So what gave you confidence to listen to this market and to go and find some solution to their problems? So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I think a lot of our journey and path was shaped by the market. We started the business with a very simple promise that regular Africans could actually build a world-class business in Africa. And why did we want to be $1 billion business? We figured that, look, okay, if somebody at some point looked at Cellulant and said, these two guys were sort of two irregular guys, didn't go to Ivy League schools, never left the country, fully born and bred, educated in the local system. Bolaji went to Nigeria, went to a university in Nigeria. I went to school in Nakuru. I didn't actually go to school in Nairobi. Actually, when I came to Nairobi, I was a little fascinated that people spoke English really well. So we figured that, look, if we built a $10 million business, if you ask somebody, okay, is that then a successful model that you can actually be young, regular Africans who built a business, no political connections, no corruption, it would be debatable whether it's a successful model, right? Maybe at $100 million, there'd be a richer thief, richer politician, and so on, right? And then there'd be some kind of debate. Maybe the debate would be less, but there'd be some debate. But we figured that $1 billion is no contest, right? There's no debate. Does the model work? Can you do it? Can you do it in Africa? Can you do it with corruption? Can you really succeed? There would be no debate whatsoever. And so that's actually set a fairly powerful incentive. So, Cellulant, Bolaji, and myself, if you ever want to get me upset, is to tell me something can't be done, or to tell me that we can't do it for one reason or another. That never sits well in my ear and Bolaji's ear. So we're driven, and of course we drove a lot of people crazy, and on our teams, and there's a lot of them here, and they know we drive them crazy. So that was essentially, you could say, the mission of the business. Now, we didn't, at that time, make any attempt to define what exactly our business was going to be. But we knew we needed to be $1 billion business and so on. So we started off as a music business, right? And it was a very simple model. We published a catalog over the weekends, listed the top 10 songs, top 20 songs. You sent a text. The system sent you back a song. We charged you $1, and that's it. 2004, 2005, 2006, we were basically just trying to stay alive. And then in 2006, then we basically got the model right, and we started to grow rapidly. And by 2008, we had grown roughly a $5 million business selling music in Kenya and Nigeria. And so that was a period of relative growth and relative peace. Essentially, all of this time that I spent with landlords, suppliers, and whatever it is sort of just disappeared. And a lot of my time started being spent on, figuring out, if we're going to be $1 billion business, what business lines are we going to be in? There was a couple of things that were already set. We knew that it was mobile. We could see it was growing. At that time, we had served about 6 million consumers, unique consumers who had bought our music. So we knew that if you extrapolated that, there was actually sufficient opportunity to grow. But then we were concerned about the business line. We said, look, with the music, we don't sing the songs. So we are a middleman of some sort. And we became concerned that maybe it wasn't possible to actually become a $1 billion middleman in the music business. But then we started looking at the data with all this time that I had, Bolaji had, and we started thinking about where the future was going. Eventually, when we looked at our music business, we realized several things. One is that we had served 6 million customers. They were paying $1. Nobody had a problem. Our critical success factor of our mission became very clear. I said, actually, to become a $1 billion business, we need to serve 100 million customers, earning $1 per customer per month, right? It became very clear. So, since we had served 6 million customers in Kenya and Nigeria, you could see that, to get to 100 million, we need to expand a couple of markets. So that became an imperative that we needed to do. And then we started to look at this $1 per month, and then realize one thing, that whereas customers paid us $1 for music, the mobile operators took 80 cents. But despite that, we still had a $5 million business. So we started to wonder, these guys, can we take them out of the equation? And we started to think a little bit about how, if we had this problem, then other people would have this problem. Most probably other people in the future would have the problem. This is how we started to think about being a payments business. And then immediately we started to think a little bit about that. It became very clear that, actually, it makes sense to be a payments business. And if we build out a payments business, we'll have a really successful high-margin music business. And then we open up this platform to other people that have the same problems. And so when we started this journey, this was sometime in 2006, we started to make some moves in this journey. And it started with a simple call, going out, talking to banks, selling this vision that you could do this. And banks thought we were crazy at the time. And banks would ask us, will Africans trust mobile phones? Will they transact on mobile phones? Will never happen. And sometime in 2007 or March 2007, there was a small article in the Nation newspaper. Just says Safaricom launches money transfer service. Very tiny article in an inner page of the newspaper. And on this particular day, I happened to be presenting to some directors of one of the large banks. And I asked them, hey, did you see what Safaricom launched today? And they said, forget about those guys. They don't know much about the money business. And I looked at them in horror and I just said, are you serious? Because if you knew Safaricom the way I do, and they came anywhere remotely close to the business I do, I'd want to pay a lot of attention because they execute well. And so 1 year later, then M-Pesa sort of got traction. And all of a sudden, banks stopped asking us these silly questions. And then they started calling. No, they could never remember our name. They say, there are those young guys, Cellulite something. They seem to have been talking about this stuff. Call those guys. And so at this point, we just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And then in this place, I was like a madman, So I used to just go into the office. I had one single marching order. It's just sign up as many banks as you can, right? We have a short window. We have a nice window in the market. Sign up as many banks as we can. And that's what we did. And some of our early customers were the multinational banks, Barclays, Standard Chartered, and so on. And these banks then basically had operations in other markets. And we went with them into the other markets. We set up operations.
Amazing.
And so we did this. And in a couple of years, we essentially expanded our footprint to 13 countries. This is how we went to 13 countries. Mm-hmm. So it was very organic, but guided by a very singular and timeless mission, which kind of had set some sort of boundaries about the type of business and the hunger to succeed, you could say.
Indeed. Ken, people are your biggest resources. I mean, building a business, you have to have a very strong management team. You also have to build them from somewhere. So maybe just talk about what you're doing to build a strong caliber of good potential, employees that would come into Cellulant, and particularly what you're doing for the younger students.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question, I think, and it's really central to our progress. I would say it's essentially a secret weapon to why we are where we are, and will continue to be really a competitive advantage for us into the future. And I think we were talking earlier, and I was telling you that now I believe that for me to succeed, I generally need to spend 80% of my time with people. And it started early, it was a philosophy. So my sense is that entrepreneurship is a team sport. The first 2 employees of Cellulant was myself and Bolaji. And team sport in every sense. We shared the business 50-50, despite the fact that he put all of the money. Every single cent that we needed to pay early, we shared 50-50, right? I mean, it was always a shared understanding that, okay, you put the money, but I'm putting time, taking risk. Then we got the 3rd employee, and the 4th, and the 5th, and the 6th. And at that time, some of these employees started to basically work without pay. So those are not employees. Those are partners, right? They have come at a certain pace in the journey, but they are partners for all intents and purposes because they've brought the only thing that they've got, which is their talent, their career prospects and stuff, to the party. So for me, from a people philosophy point of view, it's just deeply philosophical. That you treat them as partners, they bring everything to the table. That's just it. And because they are really skilled, you went for the best in the first place. Then very early, you just have a better team than the other guy. Right? You have a much more committed team than the other guy. And so in the beginning, I think it was always hand-to-hand combat. And when I found good guys, boy, I stalked them everywhere. I was relentless about finding good people.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And Ken, you're working with the African Leadership University to build talent. As you're saying, there's a certain caliber of persons that you want to build right from the education institution. I think that's a fantastic thing you're trying to do. Maybe just speak a little bit to that and share with us what you're doing to hone this talent right from the, university level.
Yeah, so I think as we began to kind of think a little bit about how to build the systems that support our people to grow, I look at several things, so there's the systems for how you hire and you identify, and then how you grow them. So from the beginning, how do we start to grow people?
Yes.
And what we realize is that then it makes a lot of sense. And when we listen to how ALU thinks and thinks about education,
Indeed.
we say then it's actually very powerful to actually identify talent from their first year in university. Now, that's a really long-term deal. So we paid school fees of, I think now we have a cohort of 9. It was our intention to double that cohort every year. We haven't followed through very well, but we'll go back and get our act together in that area. So the design of that program was basically to make sure that the entry-level guys that come into Cellulant,
yes,
basically we have had a lot of interaction time. We've chosen the best. And throughout their school, they spend about 3 months with us. And so that we know them, they know the business, and so on and so forth. So those guys will come into Cellulant full-time in 2019.
Wow.
So we just thought that, it made a lot of sense to actually think a little bit about the pipeline and to bring people that were sort of built to work at Cellulant from very early on. So it's a development program, one of the 3 that we have. So there's an entry level, it looks at those guys there. Then there is a middle level development program and so on. So what we're trying to do with this program is become very intentional about identifying, engaging, and supporting people to grow as a fundamental backbone of the business, right?
Yes.
Because what we know is that we actually want to build our competitive advantage based on people.
Yes.
And this is how I look at it. I say, well, if we want to build $1 billion business, maybe the total staff count will have about 1,000 people.
Yes.
Now we know that the skill pool for a technology business that's operating at that size is going to be few people. Everybody that runs a business knows it's increasingly difficult to identify people. We just think that, look, it's very simple. If we have 1,000 of the best people in the different fields that can work in a technology company, we will starve the competition of talent. That's just the thing. So it's good to develop people. I think it's a fundamental, at least thesis in my strategy.
True. Amazing. I was pleasantly surprised, actually, when I walked into your offices, Ken, today, and I saw a huge complement of women. I was so proud of you. How many women are you employing, and what is, your mission, and why women, as workers? Because tech is a space where a lot of men, are the founders and co-founders. We don't see so many women there. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, to be quite honest, until you asked the question, I've never really thought about it, and I'm embarrassed, of course. I mean, there's a huge conversation around gender stuff. I think we have about 338 people in 13 markets. I think about 122 women. So that's, I think in most of the countries, about 38% of the guys are women. As I was thinking about the ratio, I don't know whether that's good or bad.
I think it's fantastic.
However, what I see is that our stars are women. So I always say there is a 50% chance that today, if I step down from being CEO, my successor would be a woman. In the management team, there is 6 out of 14 women. I think at the end of the year, that number could be 9. We are recruiting, and I see some of the top performers in the incoming pipeline are women. Not because we are looking specifically for women, they're just the best in the pile for those particular roles.
Amazing. Let me shift you back now to very exciting times right now in Cellulant. Your initial capital raise, and you mentioned, something about that slightly earlier, was $1.5 million when you initially took on venture capital investment. However, everyone knows in this room that Ken has raised $47.5 million. So Ken, how did that journey begin, and what made you comfortable speaking to investors and getting them convinced to actually put in that scale of capital into your business?
Yeah, I mean, it all sounds well scripted, isn't it? Right? It's like, okay, so we raised 1.5 in our first investment. You could call it Series A. This was in 2011. 2014, we raised an additional $6 million from 2 institutional investors. The current round is a participation of our existing investors and some new investors. TPG and Rice Fund are well known. They are a seasoned technology investor in different sectors and with a lot of experience in technology. So I'll talk a little bit about the journey of fundraising. That has not always been very easy as a founder. Every moment that we have had institutional investors was always a very difficult time for me because there's all these valuations that you read about magazines and so on and so forth. And then, somehow, that's not the valuations you're looking at. So there's always a disconnect between at least the founder expectation, your own opinion of what the business is worth and the reality in the market. That's always been a journey. And I think in every one of the rounds, it's always been one of the most difficult and excruciating things for me as well. But in the end, you listen a lot, you look at stuff and whatever it is, and have successively made peace with that journey as we went along. So I think that was always a thing. Raising the funds themselves, the transaction process and so on, has always been a fantastic learning experience because so you talk to a lot of investors. Every part of your business is questioned, is debated, is discussed in detail and so on. So it's always been a fairly refreshing process in getting you to figure out the business very differently. The last fundraising round, as big as it is, was also very challenging. I started the journey about 24 months ago. I didn't expect that it was going to take that long. And to be quite honest, it was a bit of naivete. It was a combination of a bit of naivete and a bit of cockiness a bit, right? Because we'd been in business for a long time. We have some of the best customers in the business. The payment space itself is very hot. And at least in terms of name recognition, we always you talk about payments, our name comes up. So I quite frankly didn't expect that it was going to take long. Mm-hmm. And so my sense was that it was going to take about 6 months. The previous rounds, we had raised them almost organically. You ran into some investors, you caught for a long period of time.
Sure.
You kind of like each other, and then the timing is not right. And then at some point, the right timing comes and you go and say, hey, guys, we've been talking for a while. I think we are right. Mm-hmm. And then you get in and start discussing the transaction, the deal terms, and so on.
Sure.
This particular one, we knew that we wanted to raise a large round of capital. It wasn't as large as it ended up being. Mm-hmm. So we identified 60 investors and then got onto the road and basically just reached out, did a pitch deck and show and sent it out. And basically then the no started to come.
So out of the 60, only one came.
In the end,
amazing.
60 investors, one term sheet. And, so I talked to some investors who say, well, I've got 6 term sheets. And I say, how do you do that? It's like, I don't understand it. But that journey taught me a couple of things. One, is as a payments business in Africa and the type of payment business we've evolved, we generally have more moving pieces than a payments business in another part of the world, right?
Indeed,
and typically, sadly, the kind of investment round that made the last round, those types of investors are not local investors. That's just the reality.
Yes.
I mean, you are raising $30 million and whatever it is and things like this. Those are not local investors. Mm-hmm. There were essentially London-based, Joburg-based, and US-based investors. Mm-hmm. So our business was a little more complex than they'd been accustomed, right? I think what I came to learn is that investors figure out is that you take a business model, it's very simple, you throw capital at it and you out-execute everybody else. Mm-hmm. The payments in Africa is a little bit more nuanced than that. So our business ends up being operationally much more complex than typically they've been accustomed to. Mm-hmm. So very early, we were not very articulate in explaining that fact and bringing that context. So investors basically, some of very fairly good investors, they love the management team, dropped out because of that complexity. A couple of the guys just dropped off through what I call just bad storytelling. So I went into the fundraising round, relatively okay storyteller, but it wasn't good enough. Because,
I think you're doing well. I mean, you're a good storyteller.
It's just after 400 presentation, it wasn't always this good at the beginning, 400. Right? And quite frankly, this is my belief. I lost a lot of investors. And I think that I also left some value on the table because of the storytelling. I tend to think that if I went back to the same 60 today, 400 presentations later, I'd basically maybe close around 50% higher valuation and maybe 6 term sheets.
Maybe the 60 will come back after this.
Yeah. So I'm a better storyteller than the average Kenyan. So a lot of the Kenyan entrepreneurs, our education system, man, just did not train us to tell the story. You know? And it costs real value. Right?
Sure.
I mean, just articulating yourself and stuff like that is like real value on the table. Mm-hmm. It's not a joke. And 400 presentations, so it was rigorous in terms of time. 400. Yeah, so I was practically out of the business for 24 months. So if I hadn't built a good team,
indeed, yeah,
our business would have stopped growing. And
Agreed.
What happens in the fundraising round? You meet an investor, they say, so great, how are you tracking on your numbers?
Mm-hmm.
And they look at your the commitments that you made in the last presentation. And a lot of the good ones have elephant memories, I remember.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're out on the road for too long, you haven't prepared yourself, you haven't built a good team, and then what happens? The business, and because you are away,
indeed,
your CFO and so on. And if the business starts to falter, you almost will not raise funds.
Actually, you lose value.
Yeah.
And this is something that entrepreneurs go through a lot, because when you're out fundraising and you didn't build the team, you find that your revenues dip.
Yeah.
And
sometimes
or
they dip. It's the worst thing that can happen when you're on the road.
Yeah. And being on the road can be a long journey. And as you're saying, yours was 24 months. And here you are, you had built a business, you are, in all these African countries and had revenue. Yeah. And your type of investor, is someone who is used to a different type of market, different type of businesses. They're used to, these businesses that, when they exit, they'll list in the global stock exchanges and things like that. So what got them comfortable with you doing payments business in Africa, especially because of that fear of, money laundering, money moving around and people not being very sure about, all those regulatory regimes and things like that. So what really got them confident and what, really sealed the deal for you?
I think it was a combination of very many things. We were on the road for long enough. First, the story and the clarity of the stuff to really get it sharp. Yeah, because you'd listen to the other guy who said no, I'd sit with them, I'd try to understand what exactly didn't work, and then I'd go out and reflect a lot on those things and just, you think through it, look at it better, and so on. So part of the stuff was just much more sharper storytelling, understanding what the problems were, and basically being able to provide context for them. I think that was a very key. I think that was one of them. And because the pack that closed the stuff came on the tail end. There are people that are essentially, we had engaged for a while,
sure,
and then began to re-engage again on the tail end after sort of a lot of no's in between.
Mm-hmm.
I think the second thing is that we got admitted into the Endeavor Network.
Mm-hmm.
The Endeavor Network is this network of high-impact entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
And basically for a lot of investors that are not in the market, who had been familiar with our network,
yes,
it was in some kind of endorsement because it's a very rigorous process to go
mm-hmm.
through. Basically, we're just part of a network whose standards and track record was known.
Mm-hmm.
The third thing has got something to do with the investors themselves. I think there's always a timing. I think for them it was the right time. They had a partner that understood Africa well,
mm-hmm.
understood payments well in Africa. And I think just at the tail end of the stuff also it's possible that their timing must have aligned. So it was a combination of some learning, me getting better, us getting better. It was a combination of that the business actually had stayed very consistent across the time as they kept watching the business,
mm-hmm.
And luck. Some of the other things I can't control.
So I think indeed those are very valuable lessons, Ken, that you've learned through the journey and through the various, iterations of fundraising that you've been through. And what would you like to really impart on local entrepreneurs? What do you want to share with them tonight and tell them this, I think, dear brothers and sisters, is what you need to do to get your business to this level?
Well, every person's context and barriers to growth are different and they are context sensitive, right? They are very specific context.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's great to desire growth from very early on. I like to say, go big, go bold, or go home, right? Because if business is about solving problems, and Africa has a lot of them, and if we are going to solve Africa's problems, you can't be doing small things. But what I've found is by being big, there are just a lot more people worrying about the problems. So when
sharing your problem.
Yeah. When we were a small $1 million business, I was the only guy stressing about cash flow and salaries and so on. At our size, my board is worrying about it. Mm-hmm. My investors are worrying about it. I'm worrying about it. We just have a better chance of finding a solution. It's just that simple. So go big. You know, you just have a higher chance of surviving by being bigger. Mm-hmm. I found a couple of things that were very helpful in basically growing. Mm-hmm. One is basically building teams that were better than you from day one. Growth is a team sport. Mm-hmm. And then if you have to grow, then you're going to need capital. If you're going to have to attract capital, you have to become comfortable with sharing decisions with investors. One entrepreneur once said to me, I think they had a business, they got some private equity investors, and then he was complaining to his brother that, man, you know, these guys want this report, they want that, they want that. So his brother told him, calm down. The guys have given you $30 million. The least that you can do is listen to them. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like, so.
Keep calm. Yeah, you have 30 million.
Yeah. So you have to really be comfortable being transparent. You have to be comfortable having uncomfortable discussions about decisions you're making. You just have to be comfortable with that because it's the order of the day. Mm-hmm. In my case, what was a little bit more difficult was decision sharing. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like, so I'm a rebel a bit of a tyrant in the early days, so I like to make decisions myself. Mm-hmm. And so as the management team grows, sharing those decisions, consulting, and so on and so forth, just something that I've had to learn. Mm-hmm. So hunger for growth, open yourself up for investment, trust that growth makes you a little bit more resilient because there's more people interested in solving the problems of the business. And then grow yourself and the business follows, right? You become a better leader, the people around you become more productive and so on and so forth. That's what I would say.
Fantastic. And I was just wondering if, you can share with us one of the lowest points that you actually had. And I wanted to point out to, Chase Bank receivership. As a parting shot, just share with us how that process was for you and how it affected your business and how you bounced back and, continued to scale the business.
Yeah, I think Chase Bank did affect a lot of other small businesses. And essentially they've been a tremendous lender and supporter of our business for many years. And we essentially were, I think, one of the largest people that they supported. So we had a large credit line that was fully utilized in the bank. Mm-hmm. And so when the bank went into receivership, at the time, essentially, our facility, which was a technology business, not necessarily secured by land or something like that, which typically the natural comfort state of the bank, just didn't sit well. And so it got called in. And so ideally, we were in this situation 2016 where we had to pony up a couple of millions of dollars almost overnight, right? And just as I said before, when the business is bigger, the problem affects many people. And so I went to my management team. I said, guys, you know what's happened? You know how this is going to affect us? Make a plan. And a couple of days later, the team told me, yeah, so we figured out what to do. So we need to cut costs. So this is our plan. We need to let about 30 people go. So went through the plan. Mm-hmm. I'd gotten a sense that the business was bloated anyway, and the lots of people that were generally not engaged, and that wasn't the right time for them to be there. So that didn't worry me too much. But then what surprised me is the management team came back and said, look, so fine, we do 30 people. This is where it takes us, but the cut is not deep enough. And then they said, we think that for us to now get to the right level, management can't take salaries for a couple of months. And so my management team basically proposed a salary break for, I think, about 8 months through the recovery period. And I looked at it and I said, well, okay. I mean, it's your plan. It's going to affect you guys. You've said it, and we run with it. And throughout 2016, this happened. And we got work done. It's dependent on me.
Mm-hmm. Alone to make the decision, exactly.
But it was a shared problem. Mm-hmm. Everybody carried their weight. Mm-hmm. They put their skin in the game. And in 2017, we grew like we have never grown before.
Amazing.
And 2017, 2018 are now turning out to be some of the most phenomenal years of business. Mm-hmm.
And so we went through this crisis. Of course, there was a lot of pain, right? I mean, I just can't even begin to imagine how they survived. I know for me it was very difficult. I mean, I disposed a lot of assets and so on and so forth to survive.
Indeed.
But so it's always sharing the pain.
Indeed. I think your management rose to the occasion and delivered on their belief on the company.
Yeah.
Ken, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been inspirational. Thank you so much once again to you and your team for making this happen. I'd like to also thank Metta, one of our key partners in hosting this podcast. From the IDEF team, from the Metta team, from the EAVCA team, we wish to thank you so much. Your company is very much appreciated tonight.
Thank you, Winnie. Thanks, guys.
This podcast series is hosted by IDEV, Metta, and EAVCA, recorded live from Nairobi.